know, but I appreciate
I feel like I've already read it.
No, well, God willing, it does well. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Let me prepare, because I think you're actually, I don't know you well, but I do know you. I get the sense that, like me, a lot of the criticism doesn't just bounce right off you, that you take this stuff to heart and sometimes it upsets you. I know I'll say it upsets me.
Some of it does, but it's not the criticism that people think upsets me that upsets me, but that's a different story.
Your book will be a bestseller. You could put out, I don't know, the script to The Sound of Music, and it's going to be a bestseller.
It'll be better than if I had done that, but not better than The Sound of Music.
Well, there you go. And this is what TikTok and YouTube, the algorithms, someone will immediately say, this is why Andrew Huberman's book is bullshit. Because if they put a well-known figure's name in front of a best-selling book and says bullshit and creates antagonism in comments, the algorithms pick up on that, optimize it. It'll get millions of views, which is more Nissan ads and more shareholder value. So there is not only a healthy check on people's power, more scrutiny. The president should get a lot of scrutiny. The president deserves to have his business and personal life, to a certain extent, at least where it demonstrates character, looked into and examined. And I think a certain amount of power and healthy check on power is probably a healthy thing. Unfortunately, now there's economic incentive around tearing people down. Like, I don't know about you, I do have a real fear. I am highly imperfect, professionally and personally. I've engaged in a lot of professional and personal behavior that I am not proud of. I've been divorced. I haven't been as kind to people that have worked for me as I should have been. And I'm worried it's all going to come crashing down. And a lot of times I feel like the stuff I'm saying on podcasts like this, I'm trying to portray myself as being better than I actually am. I have huge imposter syndrome. And big tech has an economic incentive in trying to find as many guardians of gotcha pins as possible. Because if you get to a certain point of fame or credibility, there's just too much money in trying to find the soft tissue on you. So there's a very unhealthy attribute in our society where we're all just waiting for bad news, and there's economic incentive to say, well, this person isn't perfect. Look what this person did. So I agree with you. We need to demonstrate a little bit more grace. Something I really hate about my party, I consider myself a proud progressive, is these purity tests, right? That, I put out a picture of me and a bunch of buddies that I went to UCLA with. One's an aircraft carrier pilot. One's an ophthalmologist. Like, it was a picture of all of us. And I've said, find impressive men and befriend them.
I think I saw that post. You were the one towering over the rest of them.
Yeah, I think I've shrunk.
Huh?
It's not weird.
You're a tall guy. No, I don't think you're. I only know you now.
I was 6'3" in college. I'm 6'1.5" now. That's nice. I'm at an age where I'm shrinking. Anyways, and I knew I was just waiting for it. White privilege. What a douchebag. What, just all the comments and all the sort of, people coming after you, right? Or people who can't just say, oh, good for you. Well done. And that's just part of it. And that's a small price to pay for a certain level of success. But the algorithms immediately grab that and elevate it because there's money in antagonism. A thoughtful, nuanced conversation online and a positive reinforcing comment, that doesn't tickle the censors. If you can create a fight online, if you say mRNA vaccines alter your DNA, you're going to get a lot of comments, and the algorithms love that, and it'll elevate it. So unfortunately, we have attached 40% of the market value of the S&P to incendiary content that tears us apart. And the result is people now don't believe that Russian troops pouring over the border in Ukraine is their enemy. They believe that their neighbor with a Trump sign is their real enemy. Or someone who doesn't believe your ideology around gender politics is your enemy. And unfortunately, it's being, I believe, and I know this sounds paranoid, but it doesn't mean I'm wrong, these porous platforms that have an economic incentive and antagonistic content are being fueled by bad actors, whether it's the GRU or the CCP, who look at America and say, we can't beat them economically, we can't beat them kinetically, so let's get them to hate each other. And that is, Americans now perceive other Americans as the biggest threat. So one, it is healthy to look at powerful people that have huge influence, such as you and to a lesser extent me, and question their beliefs and write critical articles of them. It crushed me when I can't remember if it was the Atlantic or the New Yorker came out with sort of a critical review of my book. It was really upsetting to me. And I think part of the thing that was so upsetting was, when we were talking about this off mic, it meant some of it was true. That's healthy. It's healthy when there's thoughtful criticism around your book. But when I have hundreds of comments accusing me of shit that never happened, and then you look at it and it's Dog Mom Wisconsin 331 with 3 followers, that's a bot. And the fact that these platforms choose not to screen out those bots because they know more incendiary comments that create more comments and more Nissan ads, I think that is tearing at the fabric of America. But I just want to acknowledge the point. I think maturity is realizing people aren't perfect, learn from them what you can, But I do think the wealthiest man in the world and the president should be held to a higher standard. I think they have extraordinary blessings. I think their decisions matter. And I think the scrutiny they come under is warranted. And I will say this, I think the president, to a certain extent, Elon Musk, have created a lot of cloud cover for our imperfections.
As many of you know, I've been taking AG1 for nearly 15 years now. I discovered it way back in 2012, long before I ever had a podcast, and I've been taking it every day since. The reason I started taking it, and the reason I still take it, is because AG1 is, to my knowledge, the highest quality and most comprehensive of the foundational nutritional supplements on the market. It combines vitamins, minerals, prebiotics, probiotics, and adaptogens into a single scoop that's easy to drink, and it tastes great. It's designed to support things like gut health, immune health, and overall energy. And it does so by helping to fill any gaps you might have in your daily nutrition. Now, of course, everyone should strive to eat nutritious whole foods. I certainly do that every day. But I'm often asked, if you could take just one supplement, what would that supplement be? And my answer is always AG1, because it has just been oh so critical to supporting all aspects of my physical health, mental health, and performance. I know this from my own experience with AG1, and I continually hear this from other people who use AG1 daily. If you would like to try AG1, you can go to drinkag1.com/Huberman to get a special offer. For a limited time, AG1 is giving away 6 free travel packs of AG1 and a bottle of vitamin D3K2 with your subscription. Again, that's drinkag1 with the numeral 1.com/Huberman to get 6 free travel packs and a bottle of vitamin D3K2 with your subscription. I disagree vehemently with one point, which is that I'm more influential than you are. You're incredibly influential. In fact, an ex-girlfriend's sister who went to NYU asked me if I knew who you were. I said, of course. And she said, her words, for our generation, Scott is like a father to us. It's like and she happens to be in venture capital, but so maybe there's a finance link there too. But I pressed on that a little bit and just asked, and she said, yeah, like we look up to him, we listen to him. He's very paternal to us. So I thought you might appreciate that.
I do appreciate that. Although I would have
come from a woman as well.
I'd appreciate it more if she'd said older brother. I'm very conscious of my age now.
Are you?
But
really?
100%.
You're in your 60s. You're super fit. You got 2 healthy boys. You're in a happy relationship. You got huge reach. I imagine your bank accounts are fine, and you're actively engaged in service. In my eyes, you're doing great.
I appreciate that, but I'd rather be in this spot at 41, not 61. I'm very self-conscious about my age, but I just want to go back to something I think that gets in the way of success, and it's been a huge unlock for me. It's not, but your fear of criticism. If you're going to be successful, you're going to face criticism. Starting a business is subjecting yourself to public failure. I want to go back to something you said about approaching women and guys being afraid to be that guy. I think some of that is a little bit exaggerated, and that most women, if you are respectful, the vast majority of women, if you are respectful and approach a woman at a bar, hi, how are you? And she's not interested, you're going to be fine, and you're both going to be fine. And just as I think there's 2 myths that are damaging to the mating market, which is really upsetting to me. One, that men think that all women are looking to, or a lot of women are looking to embarrass them and they might get canceled professionally. If you're respectful to a woman and approach her and make her feel safe, and then if she's not interested, politely exit, you're going to be fine, and so is she. And I don't buy that you're taking your career in your hands. I think that's just bullshit and an excuse to be an incel. I just don't buy it. And 2, what really has been an enormous unlock for me is I believe in my atheism. I believe at some point I'm going to look into my kids' eyes and know our relationship is coming to an end. I was fucking their age. You got a bunch of young dudes in here who look like former Abercrombie and Fitch models. I remember they look like they're 25. They're probably 35. It was yesterday I was their age, which means just in an instant, I'm going to be, again, at that moment where I know I don't have much time left. And in 100 years, no one's going to give a shit what I said or thought or did or the mistakes I made. And embracing that and accepting that has given me so much courage, right? To start businesses, to make dumb investments that might be crazy, to tell men in my life finally that I love them or I'm impressed with them. When I was their age, I had this weird sense of masculinity that if I said, oh, dude, look how handsome this dude is, that it took away from my prestige somehow, that I couldn't tell people they were impressive. I couldn't tell a woman, God, I'm just crazy about you. And I would give anything to spend more time with you because I was worried that she wouldn't return my affection and I would be just too hurt and I had to be cool and like not need her or not all this bullshit that got in the way of me really having a good life. And what I realized is every failure I've had, people go, oh, his business went bankrupt. Okay. And then they go back to thinking about themselves. So everyone you're worried about really doesn't give a shit about you. And by the way, the dude that's not very good looking and is with a ridiculously like high character, hot woman is one of two things, has rich parents, or two, is willing to endure rejection. So I just don't buy, that myth of the man risking his personal and professional reputation. I don't think that's true. On the other side, the myth I hate, I don't know if you've seen this. On TikTok, a lot of women are saying, I don't date because the risk of being unalived, which I guess is the woke version of saying murdered.
I think it's because on social media platforms, if you say murder or suicide,
it goes right down.
I don't know if it actually does, but it's this idea that it's going to be ranked down.
Here's the data. Okay, if 2,500 women a year are murdered by men, that's way too many. It's a huge problem. Sexual assault is a bigger problem. The majority of women who are murdered by someone they know. So the reality is a small number of women are murdered on dates with strangers. It just doesn't happen that often. And 40,000 men a year kill themselves. So if you go on a date with a man, the man is 16 times more likely to go home and hurt himself than hurt you. So what I would say to men is make the approach, take the risk, and as long as you're respectful, you're going to be fine, and so is she, and you are not taking your professional or personal reputation into your hands. And what I would say to women is if you go on a date with a guy that you met on an app, there's all sorts of digital breadcrumbs, and it's a lot, you are, and I can statistically prove this, the ride over in Uber, the Uber was a lot more dangerous than the date itself, and you are more likely to die of choking during dinner than to be hurt by that man. So what I hate is that there's all this inflammatory content being boosted on online media that's getting in the way of the most rewarding thing in life. And that is to find someone who you are physically attracted to, who you sync up with spiritually, and you decide to build a life together. And not enough of that is happening. We're in a sex recession, right? And online is making it worse. The dating apps have an incentive in you finding a bigger, better deal. And the genders have done an amazing job of convincing each other it's the other's fault. And I think one of the big foci that need to be really pay more attention to is what I call renewal of alliances. I'd love to see a renewal of alliances between us and our great allies in Europe. Renewal of allies who are moderates. I know nothing about you. I just can't believe you're an extremist on the left or the right. I just don't.
Bullseye.
There needs to be a renewal of alliances between what I'll call moderate lefties like me and moderate conservatives that are everywhere. We're all Americans. But the most important alliance that needs renewal is the greatest alliance in history, hands down. And it's the alliance between men and women. The integration of female and male energy, the ability to find someone you want to procreate with, to build something together, that is the most rewarding thing in life. And I can prove it's key to the species' progress and existence. And men and women have been taught not to trust each other and to blame each other. I hate the fucking manosphere. And I hate quite frankly, some of the reactionary notion on the left where it's misandry cosplaying as social commentary. There's a lot of bullshit misandry online where you're assuming every young man is a predator, and quite frankly, that every billionaire is evil or that every white person is racist. But the alliance between men and women needs to be reformed. It's the greatest alliance in history. And online, it's teaching men to blame women for their problems. No, women's ascent saved our ass. Women in the factory in World War II is the reason we won the war in 4 years, not in 7. Women going into the workforce in the 70s and 80s and protections of their rights for fair pay is the reason we're not a second-tier power to China right now. If women hadn't ascended, we'd be really squarely and duly fucked, right? And their ascent is in no way inversely correlated to men's descent. Men have to stop that bullshit. An immigrant didn't take your job. He made it such that you could have lower rent, a meal for a reasonable price, and have someone take care of your mother when she's older. And at the same time, if you're having romantic problems, it's not her fault. Women are ascending, and naturally, they have higher standards because they're no longer economically dependent upon men, which should be a motivator for men to level up, not to start blaming women. And all this shit is being totally inflamed and taken totally out of proportion by online because it creates more attention, it's interesting, it's novel, and it creates more Nissan ads. But I'm trying to figure out what is the economic incentive to try and figure out a way to get more men and women appreciating the other gender beyond just the basics, right? How do we renew that alliance?
I love that statement. I saw somewhere, of all places, on X, every once in a while you encounter something that really sticks with you. Every once in a while there's a gem that just falls through, really makes you think. And I don't know who this person was. It might have been an account with one follower. And it landed in front of me and it said, the way you destroy a society is to get the men and women to hate each other. And as a biologist, first and foremost, I thought, well, that makes perfect sense, right? If you want to eradicate a population of any species, you get the males and the females to start hating each other. not just because they don't mate, but because you throw off the mating dynamics in a way that then can create infighting among the males. We see that too, infighting among the women. Although, I don't know, I think that there's a lot to explore around this sort of what the standard is that we're holding the opposite sex to. It's an interesting question. I can't say I've really evolved my thinking around this enough to maybe dive into it, but I know you've thought about this. I think a lot of males hide behind this notion that they have to be everything. They have to be tall. They have to be rich. They have to be jacked. They have to be kind. They have to be, hopefully everyone's kind, but you know what I mean? That they can't say the wrong thing even once, so they're hiding behind that. And if they go out and look, they'll get plenty of evidence for that, right? No men, no protectors, no this. Actually, I did something I rarely do, which is I brought my phone into this because right before I came in here, a woman that I've known for 20 years wrote and asked me if I would ask you a question.
Wow.
No, and it's directly related to this. So I'm going to do this. Of course, I'm not going to say who this person is. And she said, because I mentioned that I'm speaking to you today, and she said, please tell Scott that I'd personally like to thank him for his efforts encouraging men to embrace their duties as protectors, providers, and generally just being accountable. Because we have a serious shortage among hetero dudes. She lives in San Francisco, particularly in the Bay Area. And I said, will do, but can you tell me what you mean by accountable? Serious question. I want to make sure I'm specific. She said, when I say accountability, I'm referring to the fact that many times in romantic relationships, men seem to want to avoid feelings of shame and guilt to such a degree that they often respond to their partner's feelings towards them without empathy or accountability. I find that here in, San Francisco, there are many women in San Francisco. I don't think I outed her here. Or perhaps all major US metros, chivalry is dead. Men are afraid to assert their desires because they don't want the obligation that it might entail. Interesting. They give up when something requires internal growth or leveling up. They shy away from acting protective of their partners in favor of egalitarian dynamics, which is flawed since men clearly have more physical strength. Oh my God, this goes on and on. This is almost overwhelming me, but I think I'm, can grapple with it. Oh, thank you. I swear I didn't plant this. She said, none of this has ever applied to you in case you're serious. Thank you for that one, by the way. She says, they're wimpy. They avoid relationships that require work and responsibility because they don't want to feel inadequate. They avoid difficult conversations and repair because they don't want to feel shame or guilt. They avoid asking for anything explicitly because they don't want to feel obligated, or complimenting a woman, or giving her flowers, or romance. They're all scared to do it. It's so odd. Anyway, that's it.
That's all, huh?
Okay, so I'm hearing that second part for the first time, the long part. And I have to say, if I were a 25-year-old guy now, I'd be like, whoa.
Right.
That's a lot. Okay, there's something there. They want me to bring flowers, be romantic, be affectionate. Clearly, there's a reference towards being sexually proactive there. And yet, assume responsibility, level up, be empathic. I'm not trying to defend or attack this person who's I'm close to in my life, but it's a lot. That's a tall building right there to scale for a guy who's trying to figure out how to work out 3 times a week, get off porn. Yeah. Anyway, I thought I'd share that and just get your reflections.
I think that we all have a set of insecurities around not living up, mostly because, again, I really do think big tech is while it's a net good, incredible economic growth, job growth. I connect with my buddies from college. I get to build a business and market it less expensively. I can break through voices that can bubble up just based on their talent. Teen suicide has skyrocketed since social went on mobile. It's not the only reason, but it's either number 1 or number 2, according to my colleague Jonathan Haidt and Gene Twangy at San Diego State. I don't believe there's any reason that anyone under the age of 16 should be on social media where they young girls are encouraged to sexualize themselves. But if they start having suicidal ideation, they are sent an email that says verbatim, here are some images on suicide we thought you might find interesting. Yes. But also it's created unreasonable expectations for a lot of young men and young women about what they need to look like. If they haven't made millions of dollars, if they aren't on a private jet going to Coachella, if they don't have a boyfriend with a 6-pack, if they don't look just amazing all the time, I think it creates tremendous anxiety and unreasonable expectations. But I do, so I would argue that who's at fault? We're at fault. And that is we keep hoping or waiting for the better angels of tech CEOs to show up. That's not going to happen. I've been working my whole life with CEOs. They're going to make incremental decisions to do whatever moves the stock price up. That's their job. That's capitalism. Their job is to take a set of resources, figure out an offering where they get more than they paid to garner those resources and create shareholder value. They will do anything to do that. That's their job. And then we're supposed to tax them such that we can build our roads, take care of our veterans, and have a set of laws so they don't get out of control, so that they don't lie and say, no, smoking's not addictive. And then our mothers, our sisters, and our dads start dying, right? We have regulation. We are net beneficiaries from fossil fuels and pesticides, but we still have an EPA and an FDA. There's absolutely no regulation on big tech. There's more regulation in this mic than there is on big tech because they have weaponized Washington and money and Citizens United. There are more full-time lobbyists living in Washington, D.C., working for Amazon, one company, than there are sitting U.S. senators. So they have very effectively avoided all regulation to the point where they basically run unfettered, whether it's bots, whether it's harm to children, whether it's letting bad actors try and influence elections. And they, in my opinion, if your content can be reverse engineered to self-harm among teens, if your podcast, if we could prove statistically that your podcast was resulting in self-harm among teenage girls, this podcast would be shut down. You would be sued. And you would eventually decide to go out of business.
Yeah, well, if we were harming people appropriately so.
I would argue big tech does that and more every day. And these cases that just came down, actually one in LA that found Google liable. Do you realize that the New Mexico Attorney General, do you know what he did in his case? He created an account posing as a 12-year-old girl. And within minutes, he was getting messages and solicitations from known sexual abusers. That was their first piece of evidence, that if you create an account and you say you're a 12-year-old girl, within hours, they were getting overtures from known sexual predators. So the fact that this company can target you and know that I'm wearing Warby Parkers and start serving me ads by looking at the screen, or know that I'm at Coachella listening to David Byrne and start serving me albums of David Byrne's greatest hits, then they can figure out that a 12-year-old girl shouldn't be getting overtures from 55-year-old men.
I'll bracket that sentence right there. Very fair and very important statement. That if there were some balance of optimization towards real protections, that is important.
But they made, I think, $11 billion last year from people under the age of 18. But you ask who's to blame? We're to blame because we haven't elected people who are willing to hold these companies accountable. And their sole mission is to get reelected. And in 97% of elections, whoever raises the most money gets reelected. And these companies are now the fastest growing expense line amongst big tech isn't AI as a percentage basis. It isn't R&D, isn't CapEx. It's lobbying. Because the greatest ROI in history is spending money on politicians. I give money to politicians because I'm getting more politically active. And it doesn't surprise me that they're whores. The most disappointing thing is what cheap whores they are. If I give $50,000 to a senator, he'll have dinner with me when he's in New York, or she, because they have to. Because the system is set up such that whoever raises the most money gets elected, and big tech has figured that out. So until we have the judgment to elect people who are willing to stand up to big tech and actually implement safe and common sense regulation, I don't want them to go out of business. Let our thoroughbreds run. I actually believe the American model of less regulation versus more is one of the reasons we're much more successful than Europe, which hasn't grown in 20 years. But this has gotten to a point where we seem to have a total lack of regard for our children's well-being and the fact that Americans hate each other and that we're kind of eating ourselves from the inside out. So again, we need an EPA and an FDA or some sort of equivalent for big tech, especially with AI. But I want to acknowledge the point. None of this could have happened without fossil fuels. There is a trade-off here, right? Pesticides are important for our food safety, but there is an FDA. We have decided to just let big tech run unfettered. And I think it's been gotten to the point where it's pretty damaging for society. I think we've robbed kids. My kids are in the kill zone, 15 and 18. I think they've been robbed of a lot of their youth. I understand this shit. And I have a son who has device addiction, who will lie, take his phone, say he doesn't feel well, take his phone into the bathroom for 45 minutes, and I have to bang on the door and jokingly scream, start masturbating, because this kid is addicted to TikTok. What the British did to the Chinese in terms of getting them addicted to opium, I think that the Chinese, via porous platforms that are shareholder-driven and the GRU, are addicting our youth. And we're going to raise a generation of civic, nonprofit, and military leaders who fucking hate America. We are teaching kids to hate each other, hate America, hate every special interest group, hate every ideology that doesn't fit their own. And there's no grace around what it means now. Fortunate are we to be American. And I think at the center of it is a total lack of regulation amongst these incredibly brilliant companies. The most technologically sophisticated, deepest pocketed companies in the world are trying to sequester our youth from us. And they're stealing youth. The number of kids who see their friends every day has been cut in half the last 20 years. Men between the ages of 20 and 30 are spending less time outdoors, Andrew, than prison inmates. We are robbing youth because we refuse to regulate these companies. So do I want these companies to go away? Do I think they're bad people? No, but we have a system that values wealth and shareholder value above all. And so tech CEOs and their boards will make a series of incremental decisions regardless of the damage to the public. And we have a set of elected leaders that don't do their job. And that is they're there to prevent a tragedy to the commons. And it's Democrats and Republicans. So it comes down to very boring shit. Unless we reform Citizens United, unless we de-gerrymander the United States Congress, money is going to win. And these companies have more money. But no, I would push back. I think these companies are starting to do a lot of damage to our youth. I'm worried my kids are going to grow up so used to getting dopa so easily and squeezing it so fast, and this is your field, that we're flushing into society a series of young people who are so ready for addiction because they're so used to getting an automatic dopa by just flipping out their phone really fast.
One thing that I don't think I've emphasized enough on this podcast, this and certainly not this, but other episodes as well, is a kind of reframe around the dopamine and phones. I'm not trying to correct you here, but I think it might be helpful for this discussion and for people listening to, we need to move our minds away from the idea that the phone is providing these dopamine hits, because it's not. The behavior with social media, but phones generally, is a lot more akin to true clinical grade obsessive compulsive disorder. Colleagues of mine that work on obsessive compulsive disorder, I just want to give a shout out to the pioneer of this field, was a woman I just adored, Judith Rappaport. She passed away recently. People can look up her obit. There's a really nice one in the Times. Identified the brain structures associated with this thing that we call OCD, right? Hand washing, scratching, hair pulling, all the variations of it. What defines obsessive compulsive disorder is that the engagement in the behavior, the compulsion, doesn't relieve the obsession. So to call someone OCD because they need everything perfect, but then when it's perfect, they're like, okay, I can relax. That's not OCD. OCD is when you engage in a compulsive behavior over and over again, and all it does is serve to reinforce the obsession. That, to me, more closely mimics what I see in terms of phone use than the idea that it's like, no way, this amazing thing on the phone. That comes every once in a while. But after you've spent a day or so on social media or on YouTube, we are all engaging in a much more passive, slow degradation kind of way that I'm sure impacts the dopamine pathway. In fact, OCD is directly tied to the dopamine pathway, so I'm not divorcing it from dopamine. But I think if we started to look at our relationship to the phone as more of an induced obsessive compulsive disorder than an addiction, I actually think that's one of the potential ways out. Not just because words matter and concepts matter, but because I think in order to get out of that loop, you have to see yourself from the outside, and you have to realize that you're being hijacked. I think right now there's just so much incentive for being on it, for being in the bathroom, looking at the phone. Look, I'm not addicted to my phone, but I will tell you, there are days when I feel like I pick up that thing even though I don't want to.
Yeah.
And that's different than addiction. I know what addiction feels like. That's not addiction. That's happening just reflexively. Like, people aren't even thinking about it. The lack of awareness is just not there. So, forgive me for going on this tangent, but as you're saying everything today, I'm trying to think solutions. And I know Mark. I actually am friendly with Mark, so I think they care. I do think they care. I think they've created something so big that it's very hard to navigate and keep up with shareholders and all this stuff. But I would love to see the world's relationship to their phones and social media change so that it is more in our individual control, more benevolent.
But that's against their economic interests, and they'll fight that tooth and nail.
But I wonder if there is a way to incentivize that.
Well, let's talk about that. So
I'm trying to think of solutions. Yeah.
So let's move to solutions. One, antitrust. I don't think Meta should have ever been allowed to buy Instagram. I think their scale of data suppresses any formidable competitor. 2/3 of all social media now goes to one company. And with a lack of competition, there's really no oxygen for a company that might say, we're not going to allow 18-year-olds on here. Any content that's incendiary, anything that looks like it's been weaponized by bots or might be from a bad foreign actor, we're not going to allow it. I think there's a lot of parents and a lot of people who would like to be on that platform. The game's over. They've won. I don't think Google should have been allowed to buy YouTube. And people say, well, they're great companies. If YouTube was divested from Google, the next day, YouTube would decide to start a basic search algorithm, and Google would start another video platform, and we'd have two competitors, and there'd be lower rents on labor and on advertisers. Competition is an amazing thing. These companies are a set of distinct monopolies that extract rents from labor, from the consumer, and from the well-being of America. So antitrust, Senator Klobuchar has done great work here. Basically, she says, I'm overrun. She's like, I got a staff of 60 people. There are 200 lawyers hired by Meta and Facebook who are doing nothing but getting in the way of anything to do with antitrust and giving money to people who will delay and obfuscate anything around antitrust. 2, removal of Section 230 for algorithmically elevated content. Their basic premise is we're not a media company. We're just a platform. We're just putting stuff on a board. Well, okay, but if you decide this content gets more views, they elevate it. They make the decision to elevate it. And sometimes the content they elevate is not good for the mental health of America. It tears at the fabric of America. I think if you algorithmically elevate content, you should be subject to the same liability as, say, News Corp. When News Corp and Fox told its on-air anchors to repeat a lie that they knew was a lie, that Smartmatic voting machines had been weaponized by Hugo Chavez, and they knew it was a lie, and then Smartmatic sues them and says, you caused us economic harm, they had to pay $750 million fine. What happened on Fox was a dumpster fire compared to the nuclear mushroom cloud of what happened on Facebook that day. But these nascent platforms, which in 1997, we were trying to give them running room, those protections are in place for tech platforms that are not in place for media companies. So if you algorithmically elevate content, you are now a media company. You should be subject to the same liability as every other media company. And then finally, 3, age gate this shit. The downside of Instagram and YouTube for 15-year-olds is way greater than the upside. And people who say to me, Scott, this is about parenting, that's a tell for they don't have kids. This is where they get their homework. And my colleague at NYU, Adam Alter, who also has an appointment in the psychology department, said when you take kids off of screens totally, it actually is more damaging to their mental health because they're ostracized from all social activity. So, and what's happened? The greatest uptick in school scores in recent history is when they do what my buddy Jonathan Haidt suggests these schools do, and they ban their phones. So I think there are common sense solutions that keep a lot of the good stuff these companies do while recognizing, well, maybe a 14-year-old shouldn't be spending 7 hours a day on TikTok or Instagram while his or her single mother is at work and can't police it. So I think there are common sense solutions in a meeting of the minds here, but everything I propose, they will spend tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to get in the way of and make sure it never happens again.
I really appreciate your answer. I like to think that they are listening, especially in the wake of these recent lawsuits where they had to pay out, granted, a drop in the ocean compared to their total revenue, but those were very public cases, and maybe I'm overly optimistic. I like to think that they care enough to pay attention. I mean, look, many of those guys, it's mostly guys running those companies now. YouTube used to be a woman, but now almost all of them are run by guys. They have kids. I can guarantee their kids don't spend a ton of time on their phones.
They send them to schools where they're not allowed to be on screens.
Right.
They're doing their job. We're not doing ours. I don't even kind of resent them. I think Mark Zuckerberg has been especially damaging, but they're doing their job. Capitalist society has to have for-profit companies that within the bounds of law make a lot of money. Look, you can't have a Navy, you can't have innovation, you can't have parks unless you have the tax revenue to support this shit. So we need our thoroughbreds to run. They're great companies, but there's basic common sense regulation that should be applied that they've managed to delay and obfuscate and ensure it never happens to them.
I'd like to take a quick break and acknowledge our sponsor, Function. Function provides over 160 advanced lab tests to give you a clear snapshot of your bodily health. This snapshot gives insights into your heart health, hormone health, autoimmune function, nutrient levels, and much more. They've also recently added access to advanced MRI and CT scans. Function not only provides testing of over 160 biomarkers key to your physical and mental health, it also analyzes these results and provides recommendations for improving your health from top doctors. For example, in a recent test with Function, I learned that some of my blood lipids were slightly out of range. As a result, I decided to start supplementing with nattokinase, which can naturally help reduce LDL cholesterol, and it did. In a follow-up test, I could confirm that this strategy worked. My blood lipids are now back where I want them, in range. Comprehensive lab testing of the sort that Function offers is so important for health. And while I've been doing it for years, it's always been overly complicated and expensive. But now with Function, it's extremely easy and affordable. To learn more, visit functionhealth.com/Huberman and use the code Huberman for a $50 credit towards your membership. I'm glad you mentioned the Navy. Recently, I was invited out to the Naval Academy in Annapolis and had the privilege of giving a talk to 4,000 midshipmen, which includes both young men and women.
Yep.
It was an amazing experience. I'll tell you this. A guy who's been a guest on this podcast was the one that organized this. Coleman Ruiz has an amazing life story. He's not particularly public facing, but amazing story of his own life. And okay, so you go there and all these young men and women are, of course, in their, cadet fatigues and going about. They live 2 to a dorm room. They do PT, physical activity, every morning at 5 a.m. Lunch was the most incredible experience. You walk into a dining hall with thousands of men and women, tons of noise. A bell goes off.